Alright, I'm going to finish up this review. The second half of basically what we did this unit was talked about quadratics. Remember, when you're solving a quadratic equation, we followed a few rules. Number one, we want one side equal to 0. Number two, we always look for the GCF. And then 3, we factor. Remember, if there are two terms, we factor by using or look for the difference of squares. If there are 3 terms, we reverse FOIL. And this way you can either do the snowflake method or you can do the sum and difference. Okay? So if you look at number 5, it's not an equation, but it's still saying to factor. Our first step is to look for GCF. And there's a GCF here of 5R. And when I take the 5R out, I'm left with 2R minus 5. Notice there were 2 terms here, and you were thinking maybe the difference of squares, but it just ended up being a GCF problem instead. Sorry, this is 5R to the 4th, or 2R to the 4th. So this would be letter C. Factor completely. What 2 numbers multiply together to give me a 70, but add up to give me a negative 17? And that would be a negative 10 and a negative 7. Because there's a 1 there, we can jump right away to this part. Or again, if you did the snowflake method, you would jump right away to that part, which is letter C. Number 8, I have 2 terms, and this time I recognize 9 and 16 from my perfect squares list. So this can go right away to the difference of squares. The square root of 9r squared is 3r, and to get a positive or a negative 16, we have a positive 4 and a negative 4. So this would be letter D. Now, the difference between 7 and even 9 is we have a number in front. So remember, we have to multiply those 2 numbers together. So what 2 numbers multiply to give me a 12, but add up to give me a negative 7? And that would be a negative 4 and a negative 3. But this negative 4 and negative 3 replace the negative 7n. So if you factor by grouping, this is what we end up with. If you use the snowflake method, then you have a 3n and a 3n and need to use some GCF. The GCF here is n. And now what number times 3n minus 4 gives me a negative 3n plus 4, and that's a negative 1. We have a 3n minus 4 in common, and we're left over with n minus 1. So the answer is letter D. Again, when we're solving solutions, x squared means we have up to 2 solutions. There's a number in front. So our first step is to make sure one side equals 0. The second is to look for a GCF. And now we look at what 2 numbers multiply together to give me a 30, but add up to give me a 17. And that would be a 15 and a 2. Those are going to replace my 17x. So 6x squared plus 15x plus 2x plus 5. GCF here is 3x. And now what number times 2x plus 5 gives me a 2x plus 5 for the back half? And that's a positive 1. So I have 2x plus 5 or 3x plus 1 equals 0. And now I have the 0 product property, where 2x plus 5 equals 0 or 3x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract 5 and divide both sides by 2. Subtract 1 and divide both sides by 3. Which one of these is a solution? Negative 1/3. The word zeros is the same thing as solutions, so don't get confused by that. Here I have a perfect square and another perfect square, so I have x plus 5 x minus 5 equals 0. The zero product property, I solve each of these equations for 0, and x equals 5 and negative 5. Two solutions because of the x squared. Again, the word zeros just means solve. Make one side equal to 0, and now we can solve this equation. What two numbers multiply together to give me a 9 but add up to give me a negative 6? This would be negative 3 and negative 3. So I have an x minus 3 and an x minus 3 equals 0. Zero product property, solve, and x equals positive 3. Two solutions, they just ended up being the exact same. We also learned how to graph. What shape does an x squared make? It is a parabola. Remember, it points up if a is positive. It points down if a is negative. A is positive here. We know that a is 1, b is negative 6, and c is 11. We learn to find the vertex by taking the equation x equals negative b over 2a. Negative b is the same as opposite, so the opposite of negative 6 is a positive 6 over 2 times 1, and x equals 3. So my vertex is 3 something. Well, if x is 3, how do I find y? I plug it back into this equation, and y equals 3 squared minus 6 times 3 plus 11. 9 minus 18 plus 11, and this gives me a 2. So my vertex is the point 3, 2. So when I go over to my graph, I go over 3 up 2. This also is my line of symmetry, where x equals 3. So once I know my line of symmetry, I'm able to make a chart from my graph. I can pick 2, 1, or 4 and 5. I'm going to pick 2 and 1, and again, I have to plug them into my original equation to find the other points. So 2 squared minus 6 times 2 plus 11. This is 4 minus 12 plus 11. That gives me a negative 1, and 4 is a positive 3. So I have the point 2, 3, and remember it's symmetrical. When I plug 1 in, I get the point 6. 1, 6, and it's symmetrical. My u goes up. This is a minimum at my vertex. My line of symmetry is at x equals 3. Okay? So that is another thing that we learned to do. We also learned how to solve equations with square roots. We need to get x squared by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 6. And when I divide 150 by 6, I end up getting 25. We don't want x squared, we just want x. But remember, we're supposed to have two solutions. So the square root of 25 is positive 5 and negative 5. Those are our two solutions. Here, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. X squared equals 9. Again, I need two solutions, so when I take the square root, I get both positive and negative 3. Last but not least, using the quadratic formula. Remember, the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember, we learned about the discriminant. If it's positive, there are two solutions. If it's negative, there are no solutions. And if there's a 0 under there, there is one solution. So a is 4, b is negative 1, c is negative 18. So the quadratic formula is negative b, or opposite b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Remember, our first step here is to concentrate on what's underneath here. So we have x equals 1 plus or minus whatever is under the square root, all over 2 times 4, which is 8. And when I enter all of that into my calculator, I get 289. Our next step then is to take the square root of 289, which is 17, and now create our two equations. 1 plus 17, then divided by 8, and 1 minus 17, then divided by 8. 18 divided by 8 is 2.25, and negative 16 divided by 8 is negative 2. 2 solutions because we started with x.